Good evening and many thanks for joining us. This is Impact Kenya, your talk show of choice, where you're going to have a chance to hold your leaders accountable and also an opportunity to be heard over a cross-section of issues. My name is Jason Yantino. Tonight on this very first show, we want to focus on the rise of cost of living. Why are prices of our base commodities skyrocketing? I've got a fantastic panel that is going to help us unpack this subject by fielding questions from an audience that has come all the way from different parts of this republic: Siaya County, Kiambu County, Garissa County, Makueni County, and of course, Nairobi County. But before we start off, let's get to introduce our panel tonight. My first panelist I'm going to introduce is Eric Mungai. Eric Mungai is a financial consultant and is Kenya's coordinator of Commonwealth Alliance of Young Entrepreneurs in East Africa, which brings together close to 50,000 entrepreneurs from across East Africa. Eric, most welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Next in line is Dr. Gasheri Mugao. Dr. Gasheri is the CEO, Sheath Naturals. Dr. Mugao is a medic, a dentist for that matter, entrepreneur and philanthropist who values forums that foster leadership, women and youth issues. Dr. Gasheri, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Last but not least, Suba Churchill. He is the Executive Director, Kenya National Civil Society Center, from where he is championing the rights of children, youth, women, and persons with disability. Churchill is one of the longest serving human rights and social justice defenders of our time. Churchill, welcome to the show. Let's appreciate our panel tonight. Before we start off, let's have a look. In recent months, Kenyans have been forced to dig deeper into their pockets to pay for basic commodities as the cost of living continues to worsen after prices of basic commodities increased by 7.1% in May, the highest level in 2 years.
Mkate imepanda juu, unga imepanda, kila kitu imepanda.
Maisha imepanda sana na ningependa president wetu ule ako sahi na pia ule atakaingia angalie sana sana upande wa chakula.
Tunajiuliza maswali like now 3 years to come tutakuwa wapi? Sasa ukiwa na kitu kama 5,000 hiyo sio pesa ukienda supermarket.
Is the rise in cost of living due to bad weather, global factors such as the Russia-Ukraine war and effects of the COVID-19 pandemic? Or is it just a function of our own economic mismanagement? We find out tonight on Impact Kenya. Many thanks for that. Our first question is from Mallory Wanjala. Mallory is a student.
Okay, you go at the supermarket, you see the price of wheat flour and probably bread are so escalating. And this in turn does not favor the living styles of the average citizen. So my question is, what is the government of Kenya doing to curb this situation?
Thank you, Mallory. I'll go with you, Eric. What's the government doing to curb this challenge?
Thank you very much, Bwana Jason, and for the question. One, I wouldn't really answer on behalf of the government, but I would answer in terms of government interventions. Now remember the maxim that the world is now a global village has never been more true like it is now. Because part of what we're experiencing is imported inflation. You know, there are wars that are going out there that have absolutely nothing to do with us. We also rely on fuel a lot. So if the price of fuel goes higher, the cost of production is also bound to go higher. And I know for a fact that the government has put in fuel subsidies, which in my opinion will not be very sustainable in the long run, but at least they are there. I am also aware that Parliament did pass the finance bill, and there were proposed taxation measures on basic commodities, which were rejected by Parliament. So at least the government is trying to do what it can. As to whether that will work in the long run, the jury is out there. But I would ask, it is time to tighten our belts. The roller coaster is not yet over. I'm not a prophet of doom, but I would say it is time that we Kenyans tighten our belts.
That sounds like it's going to get worse.
Absolutely.
Dr. Ari, you saw the proposals from government taxing unga, wheat flour, maize flour, best commodities. Why do you think the government is targeting such areas? Because that is where the common mwananchi feeds from.
Number one, we have a tax regime that is so burdensome and cumbersome on the commoner. As someone who's in the manufacturing sector, I can tell you it's been a difficult time. The last, let's say about 3 years, I mean, even before the issues that we are seeing from the world becoming a global village came in, we had a weak economy. And so whatever we are having is actually a compounding of the issues that have now found a weak economy. And so you have COVID-19 that came, and we had to figure out how to navigate that. It's not, we are not out of the woods yet. There's the wave that's currently being spoken about that we have to navigate as well. We have the Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, with that, two of the basic commodities in Kenya, and the ones that, those are the major food items that Kenyans use, that's wheat and flour and maize, cannot be taxed at the point where we are saying the country is actually in a crisis. We produce about 100,000 metric tons of wheat, while the country actually consumes about 2.4 million metric tons. So we're actually outsourcing or importing 96% of our wheat. And then we say that we're going to tax wheat, while we can see that most of it actually comes from the countries out there, and there's already a crisis in terms of the supply chain. We're just going to make this problem worse. And as the other panelists have said, we are going to worse times if we continue the way we are continuing. I'm glad that Parliament has suggested that we do not add more tax into this, but we wait to see what the response will be at the very end.
Thanks, Dr. You said you're in the manufacturing.
I am in the cosmetics sector. We manufacture natural cosmetics for hair and skin care.
Okay.
Yes.
Now listen to this, Super Chache. Data from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics released in May this year shows food producer price indices grew by 5.67% between December 2021 and March 2022. In March alone, it grew by 11.26%. That is even before the members of parliament rejected the proposals to tax the best commodities. What do you have to say about it?
Yes, I mean, it's a very worrying situation because there are different stages of inflation. Inflation basically means rise in prices, and most of those that affect basic and essential services. The very first level is normally called creeping inflation. Creeping inflation is regarded, in fact, as good, even though it signifies an increase in prices, because creeping inflation leads to more production. When prices are high and the people producing those goods think that they are able to fetch more prices, then they produce more. So creeping inflation leads to more production, and it's normally regarded as good for the economy. And that is inflation that is not more than 2%. Now, the figures you are citing is between 3 and 10%. Now, that is called walking inflation. The pace is higher. You know, when people creep, they're just tiptoeing. But now this is walking inflation. And so the figures you are talking about are almost heading towards what is called galloping inflation. That is the pace of a horse that is now on the move. And so I agree with Mungai that you know, the situation does not look very rosy. The inflation you see, those increases in prices, are a combination of so many things. We have been told, those who have been following the Russia-Ukrainian war, that the areas that are of interest to Russia in the Ukraine are areas around the port. So it means ships that are supposed to leave Ukraine and Russia itself cannot live, because those are the areas that Russia wants to control. Then locally, our government, and I like the question, what is the government doing? The inflation you see in this country is also a consequence of government policy and regulation. Government policy means the taxes they impose. Those taxes that members of the National Assembly rejected, that's a policy, that's a government policy. And so when government is trying to generate revenue, a lot of it for these capital-intensive projects that you see, Nairobi is today very beautiful. Those who come from outside Kenya like coming to Nairobi for tourism. But the beauty of Nairobi has come at the enormous prices you see on the shelves, because government is trying to raise revenue to fund some of those projects. So I think the inflation we see, the high prices of essential commodities that we see, are a combination of both local and international factors.
Thank you. My next question comes from Ian Odongo. Ian is a student.
Okay, so my question is, if the Ukraine-Russia crisis affects the cost of living in Kenya, does this mean that Russia and Ukraine are dominant exporters of commodities and raw materials in Kenya, and what are the possible solutions of redirecting these imports from other countries?
Thank you, Ian. And Dr. Gasheri, you can take that up.
So we really need to think about the things that we have refused to think about for all this while, because when you look at Ukraine, for example, it is a small country that is able to feed the rest of the world. We are getting only 4% out of all that wheat that we keep seeing in the regions within Kenya, yet everything else comes from within the European nations, largely those two. So what we need to ask ourselves is, what do we need to do as a nation for us to get there? And number one is we really have to get out of the dependency on rainfall as the way to feed our nation. We really have to go into thinking, how can we mechanize our agricultural sector, and so that we stop depending on small-scale farmers who have no capacity to be able to go into mechanization, and the only thing they can wait for is rainfall. Number two, like I've talked about the small-scale farming, we really need to go into large-scale farming. There is what is called economies of scale when it comes to production of anything. So if you're producing in very small quantities, your costs of production also are as high as can ever get. So it becomes very expensive to even have our own food products if we are going to depend on small-scale farming. So the next thing we really need to think about is, how do we make our farming large-scale? And obviously that hand-in-hand with mechanization, then we are talking of big production in terms of feeding the nation. The other thing we really need to think about is, how do we ensure that the supply chain then is completed, and so that we take advantage of the fact that once we have produced, then we add value to what we have. And so the next other thing is talking to the manufacturers and ensuring that we empower the manufacturing sector. I just saw that our budgetary allocation in this year into the next year as well is a paltry about 10 billion to assist.
Which sector is that?
Manufacturing. Yes, 10 billion to assist, and most of it has gone into financing, really, financing SMEs, financing manufacturers to get a loan here and there. But the truth is, we need to do a lot more than that. We had the Big Four agenda, which has somehow gotten lost. How do we get it back and ensure that we actually work on it, not make it a talk of agenda just so that we have something to keep us going in terms of talking. Let's make it policy and ensure that implementation is well done, and it is done within the confines of specialists. We need to consult widely to be able to see. So you cannot be talking about manufacturing and you're not talking to the actual stakeholders in the same sector. And finally, just looking at it in terms of where the world has gone also, circular economy. How do we ensure that the entire value chain, at the end of the day, we are not having waste? Whatever that is going out is actually, most of these waste that you get from our food products actually ends up becoming very good fertilizers. So at the end of the day, really, I keep saying manufacturing is the one sector that is able to affect so many other sectors. Okay. When you look at like our Big Four agenda that we had, all the other 3 agendas actually depend on the manufacturing sector. So if we were to sort out the manufacturing sector, then we will be able to sort out quite a number of things. So the agriculture into agro-processing, and then just complete the loop by ensuring that everyone is taken care of.
Thank you, Dr. Eric, when you look at the tracts of land we have in this country, and then you're told that we still get 60% of our wheat from Ukraine, does that worry you?
You know, Jason, if you live in a mabati house and your neighbors are always quarreling, you have a decision to make. One, you could move. Secondly, you could talk to the landlord to ask them to move. Or finally, you could decide to go and build your own house somewhere, work hard, so that you no longer have quarrels emanating from your neighbors. What do I mean? So we have a quarreling neighbors far away in Russia and Ukraine. And out of their quarrels, we are having repercussions here because we can't sleep, we can't eat. When 60% of wheat comes from Ukraine and Russia, and yet we have huge tracts of land here, then it raises the question, are we serious as a country that one, we want to feed ourselves, and secondly, we have enough to export to other countries? Now, the government some time back did set apart a piece of land, I think Kuraru, to do some sort of irrigation for purposes of food security.
That was Galana.
Yes, Galana Kuraru. And we all know as a country how that went. We all know what we harvested, or rather what we did not harvest out of that scheme. So I think as a country, and that's why I love this show, because it is a show where we can get answers from the leadership, because we need to be serious as a country, and we need to ask ourselves the right questions. So this is a very good opportunity, even post-COVID, to ask ourselves as a country, what is it that we are good at? So if our neighbors, for instance, have are lacking a certain material, either raw materials or in terms of food production. Remember, right now, we export a lot of onions from Tanzania. If you go to a supermarket, you will find oranges from South Africa. I mean, we can do more as a country if we want to. And as a country, we must be willing to walk the talk. And the challenge is this: walking the talk is difficult. You see, it's always good when you're a government official.
So we are talking the walk instead. Eh?
Yes, we are talking the walk, but it's important that we walk the talk. Sure. Because it's always easy as a government officer to sit in an office, go for a nice interview, and discuss about government policy. But you know, if there is one area that we can improve in this country, is to empower the Ministry of Planning. Because you see, most of the times we combine that ministry either with Treasury or with other ministries. But you must realize that that is a very important ministry.
So you propose that it gets divorced from finance? From
finance. You see, I would want it to be a ministry by itself. Because without planning, all the things that we discuss here, if there is no one to put them down on policy, if there is no one to do the research, for instance, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, they're always begging for financing. So how can we grow without statistics? How do we know which sector is not doing well? I mean, telling us every year that you're adding informal 800,000 jobs per year. I mean, how do you verify informally how many jobs?
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Now, Suba.
Yes.
There are a few disturbing statistics here. It's obvious that the Ukraine-Russian crisis is affecting us, but listen to this. Farm inputs such as fertilizer, that's before the war and after the crisis. Price of fertilizer before the crisis was 4,000. Now it has gone to 6,000. When you look at crude oil, before and after, you see a huge increase. So it is affecting us. My worry is, what are we doing about it, other than just talking that it is affecting us?
You know, part of the, and I'm glad that my colleague has pointed out the Galana Kulalu, scandal, because it's a scandal. The inflation you see, the high cost of living you see, also has corruption in it. And that's why as Kenyans we need to pay attention, especially now that politicians are all over the place selling their manifestos and ideas. Who of them is stronger, is coming out strongly on fighting corruption? Because Galana Kulalu was a pilot that would have seen Kenya conquer northeastern region. That would have seen us extend farming in areas that ordinarily would do one season crops, because that was the idea. And we invested a lot. I think there were Israelis that came in to help us. See how those of you who may have had the privilege of going to Israel, how they are able to do farming in an area that is basically a desert. And so corruption. And when you talk of fertilizer, this country is still servicing debt that was borrowed to put up a fertilizer factory. There is no such factory in Kenya. But we are paying debts that we borrowed from a country that I do not want to mention, that was to help us put up our own fertilizer factory.
So as we speak, Suba,
yes,
Kenya does not have a fertilizer factory.
Kenya does not have a fertilizer factory of the kind that we wanted to put up. We wanted to put up a fertilizer factory that has the capacity not just to produce enough fertilizer for Kenya, but in the East and Central Africa region. We are servicing those debts. The factory never, no foundation stone was laid. It never got built, but this country is still indebted to other countries in terms of the cost of putting up.
So you feel that corruption
is a function.
Yeah.
And there are people, of course, who create artificial shortages. Even some of these products. You saw the other day how people who are in the marketing of oil were hoarding it. They are hoarding it in anticipation that the prices will increase. So they imported it at a lower price, and then because they are clever and they are able to predict what the market will be like.
So, but allow me, you touched on fuel. There's a question here about fuel, which I want to take, then you can proceed with your point. I want to take Carlton Olo's question. Carlton, where are you? You had a question on about fuel.
A report was once made about cases of fuel hoarding in our country. So my question is, what is the main purpose of this case and how is it being addressed to help reduce the cost of living in our country?
Thank you. So I think it's related. You can pick it up.
Exactly, and this is the point. When you are dealing with the high cost of living, there are both short-term and long-term, measures that people in authority can take. The short term, of course, are the social security monies that, older people, for example, get, the kazi kwa vijana, for example. Those are short term. But the long term would be there are countries in the world that have just taken a decision that in certain sectors that they not leave to the private sector. So public control and ownership of some of those things. And that's why you have national oil, for example. Yes, there are a lot of private sector players in the importation and marketing of oil, but the national oil is a state agency that is meant to play a role just in case the private actors decide to misbehave.
To stabilize the prices.
And the whole idea is to stabilize the prices. So when the private sector actors decided to hoard oil in anticipation of getting more prices, the government resorted to its own parastatal that was able now to get oil out into the market, but again not sufficient enough to sustain the demand. The other thing that governments do, and which I think our government should do, and I think she alluded to it, is to increase production. I think we have not invested sufficiently in agriculture, and that's why every time a budget is being read, as citizens, we really need to be attentive and be able to point out and give certain demands. Because today, our budget, unlike in the past, is being made by Parliament. Parliament will always conduct sittings across the country and ask you what is it you'd want to be included in the budget. Okay. And I would ask us, in the spirit of public participation, to be paying attention to those sittings, because it is in those sittings that you can raise an issue with a bridge in your village that has never been built, so that government can allocate money for it. You can raise issues about the increasing prices of essential commodities, about youth unemployment, and about these basic things that eventually end up in contributing to the cost of living.
Thank you, thank you. You're watching Impact Kenya with me, Jason Miantino. This is probably a good time for you to raise your voice as well about what we're discussing tonight, the rise of cost of living, by answering this question. Do you think the current leadership is committed to bringing down the rise of cost of living? Do you think the current leadership is committed to bringing down the rise of cost of living? Welcome back to Impact Kenya with me, Jason Miantino. Tonight, we are focusing on the sharp rise on the prices of our basic commodities, and we are finding out, why is this scenario happening? What are the solutions? What should we do as a country? My next question comes from Nancy Mungai. Nancy is a student.
Apart from subsidizing the prices of fertilizers, and there are other measures that can be put in place to help improve all the productivity of this sector.
Thank you, Nancy. Eric, you want to take that? I know Nancy touched, our panelist, Daktari, touched on it quite a bit.
So I think more needs to be done in terms of, one, sensitization of the farmers, and secondly is access to credit, so that our farmers are able to access farm input, and not just access to credit, but access to affordable credit. And they are also able to buy machines for them to be able to mechanize the agricultural process. But at a country level, we also need to figure out as a country, what is it that the world needs that we can provide? Because as we said, we have huge tracts of land, some of which have been left to natural growth. And we need to find and ask ourselves as a country, what is it that we can offer to the world over and above the tea that we offer, over and above the coffee that we offer, over and above the flowers that we are selling and exporting to other countries? So does the world require wheat? Are we able to produce wheat? I saw in Australia, right now, if you go to KFC, they are now replacing the lettuce that is used in burgers, and they are now using cabbages. There is a global shortage of lettuce. Does it, it's not rocket science to grow lettuce here that we can export to other countries and that KFC can put on their burger and those other global giants. You saw the other day you were in this country, there was a global shortage of potatoes. Our farmers in Nyandarua and elsewhere, sometimes they have overproduction of potatoes. They don't know what to do with it. They end up putting a gunia and putting some more potatoes on top, and they sell at a loss. So as a country, we need to figure out, again through the Ministry of Planning and the Ministry of Agriculture, together with the Ministry of Trade, what is this that we can do to ensure that, one, where we have excess production, we are either have the storage capacity for leaner times, or we have the capacity to export and sell to other countries that might be demanding. Because standardization of potato, for instance, is not a very difficult thing.
The KFC question, the potatoes question, the story was, in our news media for a while, that KFC could not use local potatoes from Nyandarua, Molo, and other places. What do you have to say vis-a-vis protecting our own local farmer, vis-a-vis liberalization, so that KFC comes here, they are free to source from wherever they want to source from?
So the question is in two fronts. One, let me look at it if I were the brand that is selling the potatoes. One of the factors that I'm trying to control is a factor of the cost of production. So what I do, I get someone who can standardize potatoes for me, and I tell them to source potatoes that meet a certain standard. Now, if Kenya is not in that particular standard, then we lose out. The other way to look at it is from a country perspective, we that produce potatoes. Now, we could say that if you want to bring your brand here, because anyway, you're going to appropriate your profits back to your country. Yes. Before you come in here, these are our requirements. And part of our requirements, you must source raw materials locally from our farmers. So are you able to do that? That's a policy issue. Are you able to do that? No, then sorry, we like your brand, but you can stay there. Next time, if you can comply, you're most welcome.
Thank you. Now, I want to hear what the young people in the audience have got to say about this issue of inflation. So I want to take one or two questions. If you have one, raise up your hand. Anyone with a question?
Talking of Impact Kenya, and we've seen the government getting those contractors and giving tenders to people internationally. And talking of maybe they might be more skilled, more than our citizens are. Why do they then allow them to import maybe trucks, machineries to come and build maybe the railways? And yet our Kenyan entrepreneurs have businesses of which they are selling the same machineries. Why do the government allow maybe the Chinese to import their machines, and yet most of these people import those machines tax-free because that they are coming to work for the government? Why? Is that not killing the Kenyan entrepreneur?
Thank you. This comes straight to you, Dr. Gasheri. That's your space in manufacturing. How are we protecting our own? I think that is really the question. And there's something else I wanted to touch on in terms of agriculture, to build on what was said earlier. Young people, are they ready to farm? Because we said earlier that we have huge tracts of land, and in our population, 70% are young people. So who is supposed to utilize this land? Young people. Are they ready to farm?
Now, we have a problem in terms of unemployment in the country. That is a fact that we are all alive to. We'll look at it and see it as an opportunity for us to reduce the number of people that are out of employment. The other way to also look at it is to realize that the poverty levels in the country are pretty high. We are talking about a country where 41% of the population lives below the poverty line. So we need everyone to come on board and be able to find something to do, whether formally or informally. And the formal sector can't absorb all of us. So the informal sector tends to be the sector that absorbs most of us. And so, yes, it would be a great way to sort out the economy in terms of unemployment. But the other thing is, are we able to make it an easy way of the country actually realizing a way of reducing this?
Thank you. I want to come to Suba Churchill. There is this policy of government subsidy, which has been talked about in agriculture. We now know that it's also in the fuel sector. I was looking at the figures, actually, the April figures, which I have here, which is very shocking, by the way, in terms of our fuel prices. When petrol, super petrol lands at Mombasa, it is costing 96 shillings. When you're fueling your car in Westlands, Nairobi, or any other place, you're going to pay more than 150 shillings. Yes. And more than 40%, 42, 43% of that is taxes and levies. Yeah. But the government has introduced subsidy. Are subsidies a solution to the problem of inflation, and are they sustainable?
Subsidies fall in the category of short-term solutions. A short-term remedy, something that you do as a stopgap measure, as you look for this long-term solutions. There was a time in this country when we had a refinery. You know, when you import refined oil into super and you have, you know, the different diesel and all that, imported in that form, those who have refined it have done value addition. So the price of 90 that you say it costs when it docks,
yes,
could even be lower if we were able to get the crude oil, and refine it locally. What became of our refinery? Lack of maintenance culture. We allowed it to run down to a point where the cost of refining became too high and the government abandoned it. I think that's where we get it wrong. Part of the reason that we are not getting value for our tea, for our coffee, is because when we export it, we have not done much of the value addition. Okay. So those who import it from us get it very cheaply. And that's the same thing that would apply with oil. If we were importing crude oil, it's much cheaper than importing refined oil products. And so that contributes to the, but again,
so subsidies are short-term.
Subsidies short-term. The long-term solution would be to be told what became of our oil find in Turkana County. Why the silence? I mean, we also trucks leaving for Mombasa. We saw our own government officials going to flag off, some crude, oil, gotten from our own in Turkana County.
Thank you.
What became of that? And so those, for me, are very, very critical issues. I wanted just
I've run out of time, Suba. I want you, as you speak, you give your parting shot,
okay.
Then we finish the show.
Yes. In terms of my parting shot, I would say this. KFC, in the KFC saga, was about quality assurance. When you buy chapati from vendors in town, you do not know the conditions under which it was produced. And that's what KFC was saying. We'd want to buy potatoes from Nyandarua, but when we buy from you, we want to know what goes into it.
Thank you.
Does it have any lead, aflatoxin? Those are the things, because for them, they are a multinational. They have a reputation. When you go to America and Canada, and you ask for a cup of tea, they come in form of tea bags. I like reading the label, and I see blended with Kenyan tea, and I become proud. That is the kind of pride we'd want to see, because we are able to produce such quality stuff that are able to contribute towards the lowering of the cost of living, so that Kenyans can once again be happy and continue with their lives normally.
Thank you, Suba. Daktari, 10 seconds, please.
Thank you. I'd like to speak into the space of the kind of economy we are dealing with by virtue of living in a global village. Very volatile, very uncertain, very complex, and very ambiguous when it comes to the market. You could expect and see anything at any time. So number one, to the business community within Kenya is to ask them to, as we make decisions, we need to be able to realize that they can also impact the rest, they can impact the rest of the world. As we think of decisions here locally, they are going to impact the rest of the world, and which could actually come back to bite us, like what we are seeing right now. So as we make decisions, even as we go into this political season, we really need to think about the road ahead. What does it mean backwards? We need to secure our economy. Our economy is struggling. We have to think of how to deal with the economy in terms of corruption, because before we were found here by COVID, before we were found by the Ukrainian war, the issue was the economy was suffering. We have debt to pay. For 100 shillings that this country makes, 70% goes into paying backup debt. So we really have to manage our debt and realize that at the end of all this, it actually becomes tax. Economically, it is all tax. So we're actually overburdening the nation.
Thank you, Eric. 5 seconds.
Thank you very much, Jason, for giving us an opportunity to speak to the hearts and minds of Kenyans. And mine is to say that to my fellow countrymen, we have an opportunity this year to impact Kenya positively, and let us make the right decisions for the sake of our future. Thank you.
And that's where the curtain falls on this week's edition of Impact Kenya with me, Jason Nyantino. It was wonderful having you watching us from home. Wonderful panel, wonderful audience, fantastic debate. It's also a good time to be part of this conversation by answering this question. Begin with the word impact. Do you think the current leadership is committed to bringing down the rise of cost of living? Do you think the current leadership is committed to bringing down the rising cost of living? Text your answer to the numbers on your screen. Keep the conversation going. We do this again next week. And on behalf of my production crew, my name is Jason Nyantino. It's good night.